Okay, good evening and welcome to the second shir of the Hashkafa shir. We're learning this sefer called The Real Me. Here you see it, The Real Me. Rabbi Yaakov Buchkovsky is translated by Moshe Ginsburg, Mashkiach in the Mir in Brooklyn. The sefer, as I mentioned in the first shir, gave an overview of what the sefer talks about. Talks about obviously the ideals of the Musar movement and things you'll read in Mesilas Yesharim and Nefesh HaChaim and Chovas HaLevavos. If you ever Shari Tshuva, you ever open those Sfarim, they talk about really high levels of Avodas Hashem, of Tshuva, of Prishus, Tara, Kedusha, things like that. Yiras Hashem, Avos Hashem, really high levels of stuff, of things. The author is trying to adapt their words to our generation. He's saying that for most people it's not really attainable. Today we're going to be learning chapter 1. It's titled From Words to Action. He delineates about 5 things which people read in Gedolim Sfarim, which in our generation are probably not attainable nowadays. The first thing he talks about diligence, or commonly translated as smada. We read these Sfarim about Stipler going, he would learn. I think there was a story once. Stipler, when he married the sister of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish wanted to meet him. He heard about him, so he wanted to meet him to see if he was appropriate for his sister. So the Stipler, on his way over, I think this was in Europe that they met. On his way over, he didn't sleep for like 2 nights or something like that, and he decided that on the train ride over, I got to take a train to wherever the Chazon Ish lived. I think the Chazon Ish was in Brisk. He wanted, he was gonna take a nap. He was gonna take a 6-hour train ride or something like that. He'll sleep then. So he stayed up one night, maybe like 36 hours straight. He stayed up, and then he got on the train, and he had a suffix whether the seats were made out of kilayim or not, shatnas. He wasn't sure, so he refused to sit down in the seats, and he couldn't fall asleep standing. So he stayed up the entire train ride. He got to the Chazon Ish's house, and the Chazon Ish wanted to shake his hand. I don't know if he shook his hand. He just collapsed on the bed over there, and he fell asleep. I guess that was proof enough that he was worthy of his sister, and he ended up marrying the Chazon Ish's sister. So this is the Hasmada we hear about. This is Gedolim books. He also mentions, besides the classical Sifrei Musar, Gedolim books. Anyone has ever read a Gadol book, they have ones on Rav Yasha, Rav Steinman, or the latest ones. They have Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rav Palm. They have all the Gedolim. Yisrael Belsky. They have been more recent. They have a lot of Gedolim. If you're wondering why they don't have Gedolim books about Rav Shach and Aaron Cutler, then you can visit my videos. I made a video with the life of Aaron Cutler and Rav Shach, and maybe the videos will clue why there was no Gedolim books written about them. Because I myself wanted to know why there was no Gedolim books written about those two prominent Gedolim. So basically, we hear these stories of Gedolim books about this great Hasmada, right? And the Svarim talk about Yalim Avatli even 1 second of Torah, and the Gemara in Chagiga says anyone who's in the middle of learning Torah and he talks Dvarim B'Talim, it's like Gachle Rasamim, is gonna like coals in his mouth. That's one thing we hear about. Then he talks about being satisfied with the minimum, which is, I think, the Chovas HaLevavos called Istapkus Mamuat, meaning basically taking as little as possible physically from this world, in terms of food, in terms of sleep, in terms of any enjoyment in this world, take as little as possible. And some Svarim say it's even like when you get a pleasure from this world, it's kilu, like tuma. It's like tuma. It's like znus. It's like promiscuity. We have to avoid that as much as possible. Obviously, you can't live if you don't eat, but to eat, like it says in Pirkei Avos, you have to say right, al lechem umayim or something like that. What does it say in Pirkei Avos? Something like that. It says you should live ashrecha tovlach, if you live on water and bread. Then he talks about distancing oneself from family, which is really a big issue. He brings a story over here. The Vilna Gaon many years didn't meet his sister. He said, "How are you?" And then he turned around and went back to his learning, L'chana Wasserman. He says, he received a telegram at the birth of his son. Right? He impregnated his wife. He went to learn some other yeshiva. His wife had no idea where he was. I mean, she knew where he was, but he got a telegram. He had a son. He said, Atov Ametiv. That's the bracha you say when you have a son. And he went back to his learning. These are stories we hear. Distancing themselves from family. A lot of people cut themselves off from their family because sometimes just because it's Bittelsman, they say, instead of the time conversing or going to a family party or something like that, they could be learning. Other people do it for more religious reasons because, their parents aren't as frum as them, or, that's the case. That was the case when I was younger. Now I'm coming more back to moderate Judaism, but I was very ultra-Orthodox. I'm still part of the ultra-Orthodox community over here. My parents are modern Orthodox, and when I was becoming more Haredi, um, I didn't purposely distance myself from them, but that was a situation where a person would want to distance themselves from modern Orthodox people because it brings a lot of nisyonos over there. People don't want to have to deal with them. They want to have the chat on the phone with WhatsApp, and you have a kosher phone. They want to do the Zoom. You don't have a computer. And they're bothering you. Why not? Why don't you get a smartphone? Why don't you get Zoom? We want to see you. We want to see our grandkids. Some people, they go in different communities. They move to Lakewood. They move to Israel. I moved to Israel. I have a smartphone and I have Zoom and I do communicate with my parents. I have a very good relationship with my parents. But people cut themselves off from their families for either one of those two reasons. Then he also talks about high expectations. People, because of the high levels, there's different things. There's different ways of Avodas Hashem. There's being extremely great in learning Torah. Some people, it depends on the nature of the person. So when a person wants to become a gadol, he goes to yeshiva. This happens a lot. I think more people will flip out as opposed to come from born in Haredi families. But let's say you're born into a modern Orthodox family and you go more to the right, you go more ultra-Orthodox. So you want to be different than what your upbringing was. Your upbringing was completely wrong. So you want to achieve greatness in Torah. Some people are very smart people intellectually. They want to be great in Torah, the biggest gadol in Torah, the biggest posek. Some people want to be, or the biggest Maggid Shir. Some people want to be, they have others. They want to be a big Rosh Hashiva. They want to lead a lot of Talmidim, Harbatzas Torah, and some people want to be Gedolim. They want to, be recognized as the great leaders of the generation. They have Hashkafa over the generations, to be Bal Musar for the generations. Those three things: the academics and the, just having an influence on a certain, let's say 50 to 100 people. Or more, 500 people, and then there's the Gedolim want to have, I think everyone wants maybe all three when you're becoming more from. You want to become all three of them. A lot of people can't reach these levels, and what happens when you realize you're not the Gadol Ador? That's one thing. And then he talks about lack of self-esteem. You're always taught in the Musar Sforim to be Anav Sheba Anovim. It says in Pirkei Avos, there's something better than Anava or something like that. It says all over Chazal, but if we just read it superficially, we think it's great to be humble, and you should think of yourself as a nothing. I, for one, when I was becoming more from, I worked on this a lot, and many years I tried to negate my own confidence. Really, that's really what it was, and negate my own self-worth, and say, I was worthless. Anyone gave me a compliment, I would try to show them why it wasn't a compliment, deflect the compliment. Anyone said anything good about me, or I would say negative things about myself, to say, no, I'm not really good. I would say about other people, oh, they're amazing. These people are great. They're much better than me. I'm nothing. And I would think of myself as nothing. I would sit at the back of the shuls, and in the shiurim, I would sit in the back of the shiur and make myself like a nothing. People would ask me, what do you do for a nova? I would say, you sit in, when people are walking to a funeral, you go to the back, you go to the back of the shul, you make your do it sneas, you go in the middle of a crowd, you want to make sure people can't see you and things like that, so you don't stick out, so you have no prominence, you're not exposed, no one can see you, you're zero, So those are some of the things that the Musar, Sfari Sefrei Musar talk about, and people can take them to an extreme. He then says there are people that should not read this book. two groups of people. Either someone who's really masugal, someone who's really capable of being that gadol ador, shouldn't read this book because it'll devalue his aspirations. And also somebody who doesn't care anyway. He's just going to do whatever I want. He's going into business. He doesn't care about being a huge Talmud Chacham. This book is not for him. The proper approach, he says, is a balanced approach where we recognize who the Gedolim are and what they were, but we realize who we are also and what our talents are, what our capabilities are, and how we should approach Avodas Hashem from a personal perspective of what our kochos are, what our talents are. And that's basically what the book is devoted to finding to the real me, meaning, yes, on the one hand, there are these great levels. On the other hand, you have to focus on practicality, who you are. You have limitations as a person. Every person has limitations in a lot of these things I just talked about. So he basically says that's the proper approach, to have a balance, not to go to one extreme, to throw everything out the window, and the other extreme to go too far. I want to add one personal story because it is Hashkafa Shir, so I'll make it more personal. This book, I wish there was a book that, I'll tell you, if they had this book, I read it when I was younger, I wouldn't have listened to it. I really was in the class of the first type of person. There's approach number one, which basically says, some say that all this talk of coping and finding balance is nonsense, is looking for loopholes, the easy way out. They say that we are expected to attain the levels of the angels indeed, just as describes the words of Gedol, and must try to learn without wasting a second. We must spurn the pleasures of this and immerse ourselves in learning until we literally collapse. We spend only as much time with our families as absolutely necessary. We must demand ourselves a maximum perfection in serving Hashem. This was me. I honestly, I was this person. I tried my hardest to be a gadol. I was not mevatel Torah for 1 second, literally, except when I had to eat a meal, when I ate meals in yeshiva, which I only talk about Torah. When I went home, or when I was home for Pesach or something like that, I would make sure to learn Torah the whole day as much as I could. I didn't spurn my family 100%, but I would like to talk about positive things. Anyone said even like a fraction of a word that sounded like maybe like Avak Lashon Hara, I would like try to change the conversation or run away. There was points I stayed up late at night. I was up till 2:00 at night for many years. I woke up at 2. Sometimes I would go to sleep early and I'd wake up like 4:00 in the morning. There were times I got maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. I really need 8 hours of sleep a night, and I was the pleasures of this world. I would try to make sure to avoid at all costs. I think there was one point I was even in yeshiva, and it was Ben Azmanim in Israel, and they had no food for it. I had no money anyway. I think I was eating cornflakes and water for dinner, Israeli cornflakes and water for dinner like every night. And there was one night where I couldn't take it anymore. I had to put a little sugar into my bowl of cornflakes and water. Because it was terrible. I couldn't bear it. I needed a little sweetness in my life. And, my diktuk in halacha, I tried if I had a slight suffix about anything, either I'd call a rav. If I couldn't call a rav, then I would just be machmir on everything. Literally, I did everything until I collapsed. And eventually, I made it back to America. Most of this stuff happened when I was in Israel. I did make it back to America, and when I came back to America, I was slowly more integrated into the world. I started dating. I came back to America. When you start dating, you start going out, you have more conversations. If you want to talk to a woman, she's not going to talk about Torah all the time. So I started going into trying to find that balance between normalcy and, but I wasn't normal. I was still, staying up as late as I could, learning as much as I could, I would listen to shiurim in the car or something like that, I think I was trying to learn Yiddish at one point because it's I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what happened. We're going to get to that because part of this book is to me to tell you about my personal story, because it really resonates. This book really resonates with me now, looking back. So I was that approach. I took that approach. I'm going to find out more how my approach went down, and how eventually I led to me as now. But basically, I was approach number one in this book. I did it to the fullest, try to become the gadol. It wasn't successful. You can hear more about it. Stay tuned on Friday for the next share.